Welcome, everybody, to our June webinar here. My name is Phil Thompson. Thank you so much for being with us today. We're excited to do this webinar, and we're excited that you are with us. And if you happen to be popping in here live, if you can make sure your microphone is muted and your video is off, that would be wonderful. And if you're just listening to this later as a recording, thanks for joining us. So we're glad you're here. This webinar is called The Easy Button for Transforming Sermons into Podcasts. And we're going to talk a little bit about podcasts today, give you some evidence on how popular they have become. But before we do that, I want to introduce our host today, and I will just kind of let you know who they are. Steve Lacy is with us today. He's our founder and CEO of StreamingChurch.tv. Steve, how are you today?
I'm doing just great.
All right. Well, we're glad that you're here with us because this is something that you've worked really hard on. Michael Gray is with us as well. He does customer support for StreamingChurch.tv. Michael, how are you?
Great.
All right.
Good to be here.
Yeah, it's good to have you here as always. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm Phil Thompson. I'm with StreamingChurch.tv. I'm not sure what I do around here, but I'm here. But the important thing about this is all of us have been involved in church work and ministry pretty much our entire adult lives, and from pastoral to executive pastor to all the things in between. Steve's never been a pastor, but he's been on leadership teams and been on boards, and so we understand ministry very well here at our company. And our goal is to help churches use technology to understand technology and to deal with the challenges. We are here to help. So without further ado, let's talk about our podcast today, The Easy Button. What's this all about? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about podcasting today. That's really what we're going to talk about. Podcasting has soared over the years. I mean, it's amazing how podcasting has grown. In the United States alone, just 22% of adults were aware of podcasting back in 2006, whereas by 2024, that number has skyrocketed to over 80%. According to Statistica, which is the U.S. podcasting industry. So there's a lot of awareness now becoming to happen here when it comes to podcasting. Let's jump in and show you another stat here. The number of people who listen to podcasts monthly has also climbed steadily. Estimates suggest that around 38% of Americans listen to a podcast in a given month, with 26% tuning in weekly. This is from the Audio and Podcasting Fact Sheet from Pew Research. Steve, you've been listening to podcasts before there was podcast.
I did. Oh, okay. So anyway, I like to, I would fit, we don't have a stat here for daily, but I'm one of the daily guys. I've been listening to podcasts every day for a very long time. As I've mentioned before, I used to have a long commute to a former job and started, I'm going to make the most of this time. I'm going to get audiobooks and listen to books as I had commuted back and forth. And that lasted for a while. Books on tape, cassette. Mm-hmm. So that would have been a while ago, huh?
Yeah.
And even before the CDs. But yes, transition to audiobooks and then to podcasts a long time ago. So yeah, they're a large part of my day and have been for a long time. So I keep up on stuff.
Yeah, you do. You're very good at that. By the way, Michael may have mentioned it in the chat here, but if you have questions, we will take some Q&A at the end of this. In about 30 minutes, we will, at the end of this webinar, we will go ahead and take some Q&A. So you can even type them in now if you want, your questions, and we'll try to provide you some answers. So podcasts. Let's just look at a few more stats here as we talk about this webinar called The Easy Button. Listen Notes, which is a company called Listen Notes, estimates that around 203,000 new podcasts launched in 2018. And that number jumped to nearly 337,000 in 2019. Quite a jump there. The podcast stats are on podcasting.io if you want to know more about that. As of February 2024, Listen Notes estimates, they estimate around 3.2 million podcasts are out there. And then there's another thing called Podcast Index. They, wait for it, suggest a higher number, closer to 4.1 million. And that's from an article called How Many Podcasts Are Out There. So you can see
Yeah.
there's quite an increase there in numbers, isn't there?
And these podcasts are not, these aren't episodes, right? These are podcasters, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, we'll get into this a little bit more, but everyone has taken to podcasts. We started our weekly, we had a weekly stream, a weekly live stream back in what, 2010, something like that.
Yeah, around 2010. Yeah, somewhere in
Yeah.
that neck of the woods. And we
Yeah.
it kind of evolved to a live weekly stream that was kind of like a video podcast, even though we didn't call it that, to eventually more of a typical podcast.
Yeah.
It
So
evolved into that. So yeah, so there's definitely a lot of activity that we've been doing on it.
We should give a plug. Check it out, Church Solutions Podcast.
Is that it? Is that what it's
that
called?
that is it. Check it out. Every week we're addressing topics that are pertinent to the church. And so it's, we're interviewing pastors, we're kind of interviewing some people that are experts in their field for doing digital ministry. So it's really good.
Yeah, we like it. Like you said, we've been doing it. We got over 400 of them that are online, and there's
Episodes,
probably,
yes.
yeah, 400 episodes, and there's even probably more. But that's what Apple tells us. All right. Speaking of podcasts, let's kind of move along here. And podcast listeners, well, podcasting is popular across all age groups. Younger demographics tend to be more engaged listeners. In fact, 50% of monthly listeners in the United States fall between 12 and 34 years of age. And so the younger generation is definitely buying into the podcasting thing, aren't they?
Yeah. So I've got 4 grown children that are 3 of them married, 1 on the way. And the wives are really active in the podcast world. I think they like the what they call murder mystery kind of stuff going on. That's a really popular genre in the podcast arena.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I've been trying to get my wife to do a podcast for years. She's got an interesting history and all that. But anyhow,
to do a podcast or to listen to podcasts.
I'd like her to do a podcast.
Oh, really? Just tell her story?
Yeah, she ought to write a book. But in fact, she just got interviewed by somebody that we had on our show, the Church Solutions podcast, like a year or more ago. Angie, somebody just interviewed her. That she just did a podcast for that. But anyhow, all right, let's boogie on here. So speaking of podcasts, here's just a few examples of ministries, churches that are podcasting on a regular basis. As you know, there's just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them, but their variety of content they offer can change a little bit. Many are doing sermons and Bible studies for their podcast. Some are doing interviews and discussions. There are some doing topical shows for their podcast. Daily devotionals are part of some of the ministries out there doing podcasts. Content for specific audiences. That's kind of probably what we do. So if you look on the screen there, you'll see Elevation and Craig Rochelle from Life Church and Francis and all those guys, Moody. And that one logo there in the bottom over in the right with the cross and everything, that's Church Solutions Podcast. So we didn't put the name down there. We should have, but that's us. So what content do we do, Steve? Do we do sermons and Bible studies on our podcast?
We do not. That was one thing I wanted to point out here is when you're doing a podcast, you get to choose how often you publish. So there's podcasts that are only monthly, which is pretty rare. Probably the majority of podcasts out there, I don't know, we need some stats here, but a lot of them are weekly. And those tend to be the content or ones for specific audiences. And a large percentage, I listen daily. And so daily ones are typically news and
devotionals.
Yeah, and commentary and devotionals and that sort of thing as well. Yeah, so you get to choose with if you're going to publish a podcast, how often you want to do it.
Yeah,
so completely up to you.
That's nice. Yeah. All right. Let's jump in here about if you're going to do a podcast, and remember this is called the easy button here, transforming your sermons into podcasts. But before we get into how dailydive365.com. That's really what we're going to tell you about here in a little bit. Before we get into this, let's talk about the traditional podcast requirements. Steve, you want to take this?
Sure. So you're going to need some equipment, and we went through this process when we were just getting started. I mean, we mentioned we started as a live stream, so we had cameras and lights and a bunch of equipment to do it. We were at a facility that loaned their space to us so that we have some a nice little background and a nice so the things you're going to need microphones, mixer, recording equipment as a minimum, and this is for traditional podcasts.
Yeah, and by the way, as I'm looking here, I still have our mixer. And it's got some guy, his name is Michael Gray. It's on the mixer. I don't know where we got that mixer, but we never gave it back. We never gave it back to him. We borrowed it over 14 years ago and never.
That's all right. I have another one in my closet.
Sorry about that, Michael. Sorry.
So we used to, when we were doing it before, we had 2 bags worth of equipment. Everything would fit in some carrying things to get everything. Well,
I got it down to 1 bag. I got it down to once we stopped doing live, when we stopped doing the live. Yeah.
Right. Because the live, we had shop lights and tables and, all that sort of thing. So anyway, to do a podcast, you're going to need recording equipment and audio equipment. You're going to need to figure out, what am I talking about? Yeah. One of the podcasts I listen to is a weekly podcast. I'm a big, Gearhead guy. It's called the Muscle Car Place. They do a weekly thing. So they got to come up with content. What am I going to talk about every week? So come up with a podcast outline. Then you need to sign up. If you're going to have guests on your podcast, you've got to reach out to people. And there's third-party tools out there that we've connected to that are kind of geared for getting podcasters to network and share guests and stuff. There's a couple of them, Phil. Do you remember the names?
Yeah, I don't remember. I have to look that up. I can look it up later. The problem with us is we're not a church, but we talk about ministry related stuff and tech stuff, but also pastoral stuff. So it's a little challenging. We use a couple services here, but they're few and far between the people we get.
Yeah, because we're very much a niche.
Yeah,
but yes, there's podcast services out there, and in all ministries, I think is going to be. Anyway, you're probably going to want a podcast guest. You've got to set up some time. So when you're going to record this thing, and we're still doing a manual podcast with us, and so we've got to schedule it. We've got to coordinate what time is it in Scotland with our guest. We had our most recent one versus what time is it here, so we can all have that. If you're really doing top-notch stuff, you're going to have a recording studio or some room for it. A lot of them have moved to 100% online, so you don't need that anymore as much. You're going to need some editing skills and some time because you're going to record it. Hopefully.
Hopefully. What are you referring to in that comment? Hopefully recording it.
We did a recent one here where it was a really good one. And we got to the end and Phil's like, okay, I gotta stop the recording on this. And we neglected to start recording. So we had to do it
find
again.
the stop. I couldn't find, wait, where's the stop recording button? It's like, it's not there because you didn't start recording. Yeah, that's the first time in all those years that we went through an entire podcast. I mean, I've done it a couple of times where, oops, we forgot. And we kind of stopped after a couple of minutes and restarted. But we went through 30 minutes and great podcast.
It was a great one. Yeah. So we redid it again. But anyway, you're going to need the recording and you're going to need to edit the recording to, cut out the faux pas. And for us, we add some stuff to the beginning and the end. So in order to do that, you're going to need some auto editing tools, and we've got some recommendations if you want to go. This is the non-easy route, right? As you can we're kind of building the case for it. Yeah. So then once you have your content together, you got to figure out, where am I going to host this? And so there's third-party hosting services out there. We actually, through our services, will host podcasts as well. Got to come up with an RSS feed creation, got to figure out where it's going to be hosted. And then you're going to figure out how you're going to distribute it. And, one of the popular ones is, Apple Podcasts is one. There's
Spotify.
Spotify.
There's different ones.
There's different ones out there. So you got to
there's a
figure out
ton
how
of
you're
them
going to distribute it and where you're going to promote it and that sort of thing. So the last piece is to promote it. Now you've got it out there, you got to let people know about it. So
Yeah.
these are the steps if you want to go to the traditional route, and it may take a lot of work, but we're going to get into the easy button.
Yeah, we are going to get into the easy button in just a minute, how you don't have to do all of this. The nice thing about me, because I had some broadcasting background, some of this stuff wasn't so hard for us to do. But if you've never done any broadcasting, you got to put some effort into it. All right, well, let's talk about, before we talk about how easy it can be, this can be changed into something very easy, because this webinar is called the easy button. Let's just quickly look at if you're a pastor out there listening to this, you can relate to some of this stuff. The staff workloads, 14 hours a week sermon preparation. If you're a pastor, according to Lifeway research, you're going to spend at least 14 hours a week sermon preparation. When I was a senior pastor for 8 years, it was more than 14 hours a week. And Michael, you know that because you've spoken in before, and it's even if you've been doing it for years and years, I don't know. I just don't get that number. To me, that's not accurate. 65% of pastors work more than 50 hours a week. I think that's true. Over 5 hours a week of personal devotions, not related to preparing to your teaching. So in other words, you're involved in preparing other material for people. And then 2 to 4 times a week is recommended for social media. Now, we've done social media stuff on the Church Solutions podcast. You really need to do some social media. And if you want to do it right, you really need to be consistent in it. So that's going to take some time. Generally, according to Lifeway, it's about 10 hours a week devoted to social media to do it right. So that's one thing. So the bottom line here is that most church staffs are pretty much overwhelmed. So now we get to the answer. The answer. What is the answer, Mr. Steve Lacy?
So we have developed a new product called Daily Dive 365 that will leverage your sermon, your recorded sermon, to other uses, including podcasts.
All right. So the Daily Dive 365, and that's the website, dailydive365.com. Don't go to it yet, because we still have a lot to tell you here and show you. But that's the new product that can actually, and we're talking about podcasts today, but it does other things besides podcasts, right?
Yes.
Will it cook your breakfast?
It will almost cook your breakfast, yeah. So we're leveraging the current power of AI to take your sermon and repurpose it into some other avenues as well. The primary centerpiece of this is through daily devotions through a mobile app. So it will take and create a daily devotion, pull a snapshot of a thumbnail from your video teaching, take a point out of your service, and present you an audio presentation. And we'll show you some more about that. That is embedded into a mobile app or into a mobile website or into your church app. So it allows people to go through, do a devotion, read scripture, and then participate in a poll with your small group. So it'll show others in your group and how they answered. And there's also a shared prayer board. There's a bunch of stuff that's kind of
So it does
embedded. Yeah,
does a lot of things. We're primarily talking about how to make your podcast using Daily Dive 365.
yes.
But it does other things. As we just mentioned, it's got its own app, or you could use your church's app. As you see on the screen here, there's Amazon Echo, which you can also work with Amazon Echo devices, and you can do a church podcast is what we're talking about here.
That's what we're talking about today. Yeah.
So let's move on here a little bit. Is this complicated? Is this hard to do? I mean, it's an app, but we went through all the traditional stuff that was definitely time consuming, but is this a challenging thing for people, for an administrator to do?
It is actually very easy. And we're going to walk you through a little quick demo here in a second, but it's got 4 steps. You basically just go in and record your sermon and post it on YouTube. So you enter your YouTube URL. The system will go out and create a set of devotions based on your sermon. It will create between 5 and 7 devotions, one for each day. and you are in control. You can preview and edit those devotions to make sure they say exactly, what you need them to say. You can select a desired audio voice to deliver those in. You can use either professional voice, or we have tools that will allow you to use your own voice for these without having to go through recording equipment and things like that. And then you just schedule the messages, and you basically can schedule them for the mobile app or schedule them for podcasts.
Okay, so I want you to show us a little thing here, and by the way, if people have questions, just type them in the chat, because we are going to do a Q&A here in a few minutes. But I'm interested in the desired voice thing, or how that works. But before we do that, it's demo time with Steve Lacy. So Steve, why don't you share your screen with us and just give us a very quick demo for people to see how easy this is.
And we are going to make sure we choose the correct screen this time, I think.
It's probably going to be harder for you to do this than it is to actually do the daily dive. But all right.
Yeah. So we recorded some pieces, because there's a few things that happen here. So let me go ahead. You basically go to Daily Dive 365 and you log in. So once you have an account, and we have the ability to create a free account. So it's going to have, so I'm logging in as the admin for the Daily Dive 365, and it comes up here. And one of the first things I'm going to do is go to my sermon library, which is kind of the home screen, and I'm going to add a new sermon. So this is typically what happens on either Sunday afternoon, maybe Monday morning. And I'll go through, and we have a sermon series. So you upload a logo that's consistent with your sermon series. You would basically name the sermon that you recorded. So you recorded, this is the recording from, we were going through a series called Facing the Giants. So this was part 2. You choose the date, you put your YouTube URL in, and you hit this download, and it will go out to YouTube and grab a copy of that video, and then start. The next step here is you go over to create your devotionals. So you can click on this little pulpit to pocket button, or you can click the create devotionals on the top left. I think I just click on create the devotionals, and the system's going to go through a series of steps, but you're only involved in a couple of them. First one is choosing a voice.
So the voice is for people to hear, like the people that are actually going to hear these devotional things.
Yeah.
You've got to choose a voice for them to hear the devotion.
And you can preview the voices. Hopefully you guys can hear those playing. So there's a woman's voice or a man's voice, and
we can't, but that's okay.
Oh, you couldn't. Okay,
you got to share your audio, but don't worry.
Okay. So anyway, we've got, our pastor is Jeff Love, and we have his voice in the library as well. And so the system will go through and it'll go through and create a transcript of your sermon, and it'll take a few minutes, and you come back and it will get to this point where you can preview and edit the devotionals that it has suggested for you. And so here it shows that it's got, I think, 7 devotionals, and it gives you a subject for each one of them, and it gives you the text for each one of them. And you can click on the text and say, I want to change some things. I can go and read through it and change some of the wording, or I can change. One week our pastor decided, I want to go for a really long devotional each day, and he just went in and elaborated much further on each of the key points. So you're in control, but these are created for you automatically based on your message. I have been very impressed with how good a job that this system does in creating the key salient points out of the message. Because if you go to church and then you come back and look at these, you're like, oh yeah, I remember that. And it gives some color commentary and kind of adds to it as well. So basically, you have the ability to edit these devotions, and you basically say, I want to take 5, I want to take 7. I'm going to create, this one's going to create all 7. You hit create selected devotions. And it'll again take a few minutes, and in the background, it's going to go and apply the audio. And it does some other things as well here. But our next step here is going to be go into the podcast arena. And first thing I do going in the podcast, this is the easy button portion, is it'll give me a screen where I just put, what do I want to call this podcast? Tell me about this podcast in the description, and then who's the primary author of the podcast. All the podcasting tools require that at least these three elements be completed. So we give you a screen, you do this once. This is the first time that you create your podcast, you would do this, and you can edit whatever the description is and put whatever you like. And then the next step is going to go over to, you will enjoy it. And you go over to it updates the podcast info, and you go over, next step is upload a logo. And all of the systems, Apple and Spotify and all the other systems, require actually a very large logo. And we'll help you resize this thing, but it's got to be 3000 by 3000 pixels. And this is what's going to show up on people's phones for your podcast. So this is kind of the cover letter of the channel for your logo. And then the last step here is it's got all these devotions that it had just created. And you basically just drag and drop them, say, hey, I want them to publish starting on Friday and go through the weekend. And what will happen automatically is people subscribe. You'll need to go back and encourage your congregation to subscribe to the podcast that you just named. And then every morning, that new episode will drop on their phone automatically. So for me, I have a playlist that I go through, and then each new episode just shows up each morning automatically, and it just goes through my playlist. So let me stop sharing. I finished my video. I'll go back to you, Phil.
Yeah, so this is what you just showed us was what what an admin would be doing at the church. A tech person, admin, or maybe the pastor would be setting all that up. And if I'm on the other side, I could get this thing on my phone, on the app, if I downloaded the app, the Daily Dive 365 app, or if I had my church already had an app, I could do something like that. I could have it on my church's app, right?
Yes, exactly. Or you can go to any podcast app. I use one called Pocket Cast. I used to use a different one. There's probably a dozen out there. And you just install that app on your phone, and it'll have an area, what podcast you want to listen to, and you type in a live church, and it would show up on the list, and you subscribe, and all their episodes will show up on your phone automatically for you.
All right, good.
So there's a bunch of different ways for your members to get.
Yeah, I use Spotify, so I listen to my podcast on Spotify. But yeah, that would be on there. All right, so let's move along here. Q&A will be in just a couple minutes here. If you have questions, we have answers. At least we hope we do. Just type them in the chat there. Steve, we're looking at as we talk about this webinar called the Easy Button. Here's kind of a comparison between the traditional way to produce a podcast and the Daily Dive 365.com way. So what you've got on one, you've got equipment, going to cost you some money. But with Daily Dive 365, it comes with it, right? I mean, what you need.
Yeah, if you record your sermon, that's the source. That's the primary equipment you need on the Daily Dive side.
Okay, so just go through these because I'm obviously
stumbling through them. So you don't need to buy equipment. You don't need to write an outline, because this thing's going to create the content based on your sermon that you're already preaching. You don't need to coordinate guests. That's not needed. You have the content for that. You don't have to spend any time recording. You don't have to spend any time editing. So all that is not required anymore. Yeah, it's not required anymore. You don't have to come up with the content. You don't have to write an outline about what I'm going to be talking about. You don't have to set up hosting. The Daily Dive will also manage all the hosting for you as well. So you don't have to pay for a host, because there's third-party hosts that if you're going to host your own podcast, you got to pay these guys to pay for your host. You don't need to promote, or you don't need to submit your podcast to Apple and to Spotify and to, there's another really popular one that's tip of my tongue I can't think of.
PodServe FM or something. I don't know.
Well, not that one, but there's anyway, there's
Yeah,
there's
they're
there's
out there,
services
yeah.
out there that you typically have to go and submit your podcast to it in order for it to get included on those podcasts.
Okay.
So with this, we do all of that distribution for you automatically. All of the big name podcasting services, Spotify, Apple, Google, your podcast
Right.
will be included.
Okay.
You do need to promote it in the old mode, and you'll still need to promote it in this on the Daily Dive side. So it kind of reduces your workload to the promotion piece.
Yeah, it takes a lot of the hours and stuff off your calendar. You're not going to be tied up doing all this stuff if you use Daily Dive 365. Very quick overview here before we get to some Q&A. Sermon to daily messages in minutes, audio message, daily scripture, daily messages, daily action poll. These are some of the things that it does. Your sermons, prayer board, all that stuff, Daily Dive 365 is something that you can look at. And basically, it's just taking the full power of your messages, the sermons you work so hard on. You can turn them into daily bite-sized content for daily devotionals, as well as social media and podcasts is what we've been talking about here as well. All right, so some features very quickly. Daily Dive comes with a free mobile app. Daily written messages can be produced from the Daily Dive 365. Daily Dive audio messages, devotionals, member and congregational prayer board. So it really helps. This can actually help bring interaction to your small groups or to your life groups. It can help people interact a little more.
Yeah, this was born within our small group at our church. And so one of the nice things about it is we meet once a week, and this allows people to post prayer requests during the week, so we can be praying over what's going on before we get back together.
Yeah.
So it can, some real-time prayer requests.
That's nice. Sermon archives. It has your sermon archives in it. Daily Dive 365 member and congregational activity reports. So if you really want to know who's got it and who's using it, you can get some reports. Detailed sermon transcript, as Steve just kind of went through there earlier. There's the Daily Dive Alexa Flash briefing that you can get with this. And of course, as we've said all along here, your daily podcast can be done, social clips as well. And here's the special offer. If you're interested in this, you can try it for free for 30 days for free. Just go to dailydive365.com. And if you do decide after 30 days that you like it, you can get it for $49 a month. That's $100 off of what it's eventually going to be. So this is a great offer.
And unlike, I was looking for some free tools recently, and the thing that really frustrates me is if you have to enter a credit card, because you don't know, that you're like, oh my gosh, now I got to wait 30 days from now. If I don't like it, I got to go cancel my car, cancel my account. There's no credit card with this. So there's really you can play with it, do anything you want. It's going to go away if you don't do anything. If you create a free trial and decide, I'm not doing, this ain't for me. You don't have to remember in 30 days to go and, cancel an account. It'll just automatically go away.
Yeah. So there's no obligation. You can make a free trial, dailydive365.com, and check it out. Special limited offer as far as that goes. Q&A here in just a second. Just want to remind you, we have lots of things going on here at streamingchurch.tv. We just talked about Daily Dive 365 and a special offer, but hey, if you get around to it, check out our blog. Just go to blog.streamingchurch.tv. And as we have plugged already, the podcast that we've been doing for many, 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 many decades, all right, maybe not decades, but well over 10 years, Church Solutions Podcast, feels like decades. And of course, streamingchurch.tv, which is we provide streaming video, interactive platforms and ministry for your churches at streamingchurch.tv. And we have a new webinar coming up July 16th. They wanted to use my picture in this, but this is not me, although I could easily double for it. The webinar coming up next month, July 16th, will be Stop Streaming to the Lazy. Rethink Your Digital Ministry Strategy. We got a special guest from the UK. His name is Graham Spencer, and he has got some real good stuff that he will be sharing with us. So you can sign up for the webinar for free later today at webinar.streamingchurch.tv. And so we're excited about this. This will help churches. All right, Steve, Q&A time. So is Michael still with us? I don't know if Michael's still with us.
I'm here.
Oh, you are? Okay. So if you have questions, folks, you can type in the chat right now. Maybe you already have, but let's take some Q&A here just to make sure. What do we got going here? I'm looking at some of the questions here. Let's talk a little bit about where can people get the video? Here's a question. So you mentioned my video comes from YouTube. What if I don't use YouTube for my sermon?
You will need to upload right now. Currently, you need to upload your video to YouTube. Down the stream will probably allow you to upload a video or access, if you're a streamingchurch.tv person, access that your Media Vault area. But right now you need to upload it to, and as everyone understands, YouTube is free. So you just got to get a recording of it and you can upload to anywhere in YouTube. You can, that's one of the constraints right now is you need a recorded sermon, and your sermon should be at least edited down to the sermons piece so that we're not, creating devotions around worship music or that sort of thing. So,
well, that was the next question here. What about music? My church has music for its services.
yes.
What does the Daily Dive 365 do with the music part and the singing?
If it can understand and transcribe it, it will. And it will assume that's part of your message and create some devotions accordingly. So we recommend that you just use the recorded sermon as the main content for this.
So you should edit before you submit the sermon. It needs to be just the talking, not the music of the band or somebody singing Kumbaya.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Okay. So that needs to be done there for that. What else we got here? I don't record my sermons with video. I just record audio. Will this work with just an audio file?
Again, right now it's through YouTube. So if you can upload that audio file to YouTube, and maybe this is a mic question, I assume you can.
Yeah,
you could do that.
You can, but basically you have to attach a cover image and turn it into a video. So you can't just upload audio. You have to have converted that audio into a video, which you can do with just an image on the screen. And then you can upload it to YouTube, and all of the tools will go into effect and do what it's supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So that can be done. You got to jump through a hoop or so, but not that hard to do. I've actually done that before. Okay. Other Q&A here.
Yeah, it's one of the things, showing it to our groups leader at our church. He's like, wow, this is really simple. So we try to keep things as simple as possible. It should be somewhat intuitive. So it's probably the key piece is if you record your sermon, and a lot of churches will record their sermon and just post the sermon online, because I'm not sure all the details of the licensing of posting your worship music online. I think things have changed in recent years, but earlier it was, you would get takedown notices especially if you're on YouTube, if you've got some worship music that is performed very well, and their little copyright algorithms kick in and say, oh, that sounds like Chris Tomlin.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Okay. What's the price going to be after the special offer?
Well, we're targeting different pricing here, but we were shooting for $149 after the special offer. So this is $100 off for a limited time.
Okay, but it's 30-day free trial. So you can use it for 30 days for free.
Yeah, you can.
And then if you decide to activate, it'd be $49 a month. And then what if I want to cancel?
You can cancel at any time. There's no long-term commitments. One of the quotes from our pastor says, wow, this is like having another staff member. Because, you know, if they wanted to do daily devotions for the congregation, you'd have to hire somebody and be a full-time job. So this is, you know, from his perspective, he said, this is like a full-time staff member for just $49 a month.
Okay. All right. Good deal. All right. Any more questions here? I'm looking, did I miss anything? Anything else we need to cover here before we go away?
Not that I'm seeing in the chat.
Okay. All right. Good. All right. Well, this is good. So dailydive365.com. Check it out. I mean, you can just check it out. You can make a free trial and fool around with it a little bit. We do offer support for this, like we do for all our products. So if anybody knows this, knows that support is a big deal for us. And so we will definitely help you every step of the way to get things going, to set things up with dailydive365.com, as well as our other products as well. So I think we're done here, Mr. Steve Lacy. Thank you so much for your input.
Glad to be a part of it.
All right, folks. And thank you, Michael, for handling things behind the scenes.
Always happy to do so.
I'm Phil Thompson, and thank you for spending some time with us on our webinar. Be sure and check out our upcoming webinar. It's happening July 16th at 12 noon Eastern Time, and eventually you can go to webinar.streamingchurch.tv and check out the newest webinar. This webinar that we're talking about right now is being recorded, and it will be available. I mean, if you signed up, you'll get a notice for it, but you can always go to streamingchurch.tv, and you can see the webinars we've done in the past year. We've done a lot of them, and you can check them out all for free by going to streamingchurch.tv/resources. We're done here. Thank you very much, folks, for your time today. My name is Phil Thompson. Have yourself a great day.